Okay, it's time. So I think it's time for us to start. Okay. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the ATP session. And I'm one of the co-chair, Shuping, and another co-chair, Mallory, is online. Okay, so please be aware this session is being recorded. And first, this is the note well, and if you are especially the newcomer of the IETF, please read this carefully. And because IETF has some processes and policies, you should follow when you attend IETF. And there are some guidelines and for the conduct and IETF anti-harassment policies, and also the IPR. And so if you have any doubts, and please come to the ADs or the chairs. We are happy to help. And here is the meeting tapes. And since we are in the middle of the meeting, and just for the in-person participants, so when please sign the queue, and for the remote, please keep your audio or video off unless you are presenting, and please use a headset. And also your name and your affiliate. And here's the resources. And this is this is our very first session of this working group. And we are newly charted. And here's the milestones of our working group. Here we did a date adjustment. So, okay, so this one is not. Okay, so basically, I think there is a mistake. But sorry about that. So basically, what I did is we need to first focus on the repository and the synchronization, and its 2 drafts. And then so I just switched a bit the order, and we need to focus on the identifier resolution first, and then the URI. So that is what we have seen the comments from the mailing list. And also another thing is I add one more milestones, which is already in the current charter. Is about this operational consideration. And so that is an informational one. So any comments? Any comments on this? So if there is agreement, and then we will update the milestones. Okay. Okay, next one is the drafts. Currently, we don't have the drafts with the ATP tag yet. We have the active draft, 2 active drafts. Justin, do you want to comment?
Yeah, sorry, Meetecho wasn't letting me get in the queue a second ago. I would just encourage the chairs to not hold the milestones in their ordering all that preciously. Reality is going to happen. And so, yeah, the ordering doesn't matter that much.
Okay. So we don't change, you mean we don't make the change, it doesn't?
Change it if you like them in a different order, but in my experience, deliverables happen when they get delivered, not when you plan for them to happen. That's all I'm really saying, is that this conveys intention It does not convey reality.
Okay.
That's all.
Yeah. Okay. It's just based on the current discussions in the mailing list, but yeah, we can leave it. Okay. Here, just to emphasize the URI depends on the identifier. So that is the point, the whole point. So anyway, you are going to, so if we start working on the URI, you will reach the identifier problem. So that is the whole point. Okay.
I'm sorry, I think you misunderstood the comment that I was making. Put them in whatever order you want because it doesn't actually matter what order they're in.
Okay.
It makes sense for the working groups to tackle them in different orders. What, Kalia? Okay. Yes, there is a natural ordering that can come out of this. And if you're saying we should start tackling this one first because there's that, that's great. Do that.
Okay.
And all I was saying is don't hold yourselves to having to finish one before you do another or anything like that.
Yeah, sure.
Because things land when they land.
Okay.
All right, so I'm going to speak as AD. We do want at some point dates on here. So I'm going to have to do that today. But at some point, we're going to want to put some dates on the milestone. I'm looking in the data tracker. There's no dates on here. The one, and I'm attempting to quickly read the charter as well because I don't remember it. I don't know if it doesn't sound like the operational considerations document is a requirement. It's just it says deliverables for this working group. So if that's something that at some point the working group says they don't want to do, then we just need to own up to that. So.
I just wanted to note last time I had a discussion with somebody about this, the data tracker was looking to drop dates from milestones because they have proven to be unrealistic.
Yeah, we're going to try to, dates are a management tool. And so as a manager, I'm going to want to see dates at some point.
Okay.
I was just told M can't make the mic in time.
Amelia. So it's next.
I was told, or someone is saying that in the chat, M is saying that they can't make the queue spot right now, so I should go.
No, I'm here.
There you go.
I was just in the next room, and I had audio on remote. So as far as the ordering here, I think the ordering maybe only really impacts with regards to discovering dependencies between different things. So I think there might be a dependency from repository on URI and identifiers, as well as a dependency on sync from repository. In which case, I mean, you can't really do sync without knowing what the data is in the repository, so you need those things first.
Yes. So
maybe
sorry,
the
this is
milestone
not the
ordering is
latest version.
important.
I don't know why. And the first two I didn't change. The repository and the synchronization, they are still the first and second. And I only switched a bit the identifier and the URI. Sorry about this.
Oh, okay.
I did it before.
I guess I'm reading this milestones slide wrong. Sorry about that.
No, it's I don't know why I updated before. Bango, please.
Hey, I'm Bango. I had two things. First is like I don't understand the proposal because I have a hard time parsing this slide and what it means to deliver 1 and 2 first, because like several things are named have 2 next to them. It sounds like you're saying repository first, then synchronization. Is that the proposal?
No. The repository and the synchronization, they are not changed. They're still the first and second.
Okay. The other thing is there's like some mention of an architecture doc, I think on the next slide.
Yeah.
I guess I just want to point out isn't in the data tracker or the agenda for this meeting, but if it were, I would have reviewed it.
Yeah. So currently you can see 2 documents on the data tracker, and I tried to add this architecture one, but it didn't show. I don't know why. Probably it is because it was expired.
Cool.
Yeah,
it would make sense. if we're having to decide on an order, which Justin doesn't seem to be true, then it would make sense to me to start with architecture so that all the other things can even be contextualized. But if Justin's right, the order doesn't matter. And the main thing is like, if there's an architecture doc, let's get it on the list and in the agenda and in the data tracker as early before this meeting as possible.
Yeah. I mean, the architecture one, I just talked with the authors, and they were saying probably if it's up to the group, if we want it to be active, we can have it there, but they would not to progress it or just make it informational if you think it is useful. Yeah, cool. Okay, so this goes to, we don't have a ATP tag, the drafts with the ATP tag yet. So here is also the question to the group, whether we want to have the existing drafts to directly change their title, or you want to construct a new, compose new drafts. So what do you prefer? Any comments? Yeah. Bango?
This is Bengo. I mean, yeah, ATP tag makes sense, especially given the conversation on the list about names in recent weeks and what these things are called and whether we should rename the protocol. So I think ATP makes sense.
Okay. Daniel?
Yeah, I also think it makes sense to get the ATP tag on it. I would be inclined to just use the existing drafts and bring them into the working group with the ATP tag on it.
Okay, thank you. So any other comments? Justin, please.
So I may have missed, has there been an official call for adoption of these 3 documents as working group items?
Not call for adoption for now, it's just the individual drafts. We need to have some documents to start with. And currently, these individual drafts, they are individual drafts, but they, you see the tag is not ATP, it's AT. So it can.
That doesn't matter, it can be goldfish. It only matters when it's a working group document.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, you can just put them in your related list. And when you do the call for adoption, that's when you make sure that it maps the thing so the data tracker puts it in the right place automatically.
Okay, so now I...
It's convention, not restriction.
Okay.
Okay. You may be covering this in a bit, but is there going to be a call for adoption for these soon?
You mean the call for adoption for the to become a working group draft?
Yes.
That depends on the discussions
Okay.
in the
that is fair.
group.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So so for now we leave the drafts as it is, right? And then we progress them, and then when it reach the rough consensus, we move it to the working group draft, right?
Traditionally, the rough consensus happens when they're working group documents, unless there's the call for adoption is to say, is this a good enough starting point for us to start getting mad about it?
Yeah.
Officially.
I mean, so currently we just leave the titles of the drafts as it is.
Yeah, and what I'm saying is that if the working group wants to work on these, they really should be working group documents.
Oh.
So I'm confused about what the proposed process here, because it sounds like you want to finish the documents, then bring them into the working group. If that's the case, why is the working group here? I think there might be
clarify,
some. Yeah, I'm
you can-
confused. I'm sorry.
it can be very helpful to have the documents that are associated with a working group show up in the data tracker before they've been adopted, so that people like yourselves can go there and see what's being discussed, even if the draft is not yet adopted. So that's the use of the tag in the data tracker. So it's perfectly reasonable to say, we want these documents to have the ATP tag so they show up and you know it's being discussed, and then adoption being a separate step. So thank you for giving us the opportunity to clarify the difference.
Great.
Okay.
Chairs can just go add those drafts. They don't need to be renamed.
So yeah. It just
They're already in there.
It's
No, the
more of an
architecture
automated
one.
thing, right? So, but yeah, again, thanks.
Okay, so just one comment is for the new drafts, please use the ATP tag. Otherwise, I have to do it manually. It won't be possible for me to know you have submitted the draft. Yeah. Okay, that's it. Yeah. So here is our agenda, and we have got 6 items. So agenda batching. Any changes? No? Okay, so now we can start. Thank you.
Cool. Hello, everyone. I'm Brian Newbold. I work at Blue Sky. I'm currently in the middle of a summer sabbatical for another month or so. I've been working on some of these documents with my co-author Daniel, and so this is going to be an update of mostly these 2, the repository and synchronization documents and their kind of current status and how drafting is coming along. And I'm mostly going to cover. I'm not really going to get too into the content or changes that might be made. Daniel's going to give another talk right after this. That'll get into this. This is mostly just about scope and like, did we get everything in here in the charter that we need to have in? Are there things in these documents that maybe should move to other documents? Like, is the structure of this make sense? Should we merge these documents? And then also like just are there open problems here? Are there open questions that are not resolved? Could you go to the next, or?
No, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. We'll try.
Great. So I'm gonna just give a really quick summary of the charter as I see it. The status of what these 2 documents are that we have as IDs, and then get into these kind of like scope and structure questions a little bit. And then if there's any open issues, it's like a little bit of a call for like, we could use some help, or like, here's what at least I feel is like unresolved about these documents right now.
Yeah.
Am I doing it right?
I'm having you.
Oh, okay, next.
Yeah, it's already.
Could you do the next slide?
Okay.
Okay, so this is bringing back the BRICS slide from the BOF, which is kind of like the landscape of the whole app protocol framework, I think is what we ended up calling it at some point. So there's a bunch of components. These gray components are IETF standards that we are building on top of, that already exist. They've already been standardized. The green blocks are things that are definitely under the current charter. The yellow things are things that maybe we'll recharter in the future and bring in, I'd hope, but aren't work that are in the current scope. And then I added this purple one, which is a thing. I'm going to come back to that question. It's like, that's not really in the current charter. It is kind of an important part of interoperability. It's also a pretty simple piece of the protocol. And maybe we could just pile that into the repository document right now. So
works.
Okay, thank you.
It works.
Okay, great. So the status, so the approach we took was to first start with these documents, basically just taking, because we have these written specifications that are just on this random website, appproto.com. So we kind of took those existing specs, rewrote them in the IETF, syntax and format and language and norms. But these are kind of like what's deployed. So we wanted to first get drafts that are in the state of how the protocol is running in the network. And then we can kind of, as a working group, discuss if we want to make any little changes as part of the IETF process, or we want to get feedback on how things are currently deployed. We can do that as a step on top of that, and there'll be a clear diff, right? So if we make any changes for the IETF version, it'll look like a little diff. That's just how we approach it. I don't know if that's how we needed to do it. And I think I won't go back over this because we already kind of started it, but we have these 3 other documents, the URI document, the account identifier system document, and the operational considerations. I think, at least in my mind, these repo and sync are like coming along pretty well. We're currently really drafting these. We can get these pretty far along. I don't know if we're gonna push it all the way through, but they're feeling like they're getting close to maybe a call for adoption. And I think next, the URI and account identifier systems, we can start drafting and pushing on those kind of as another phase. And I don't know if we'll get some all the way through to the end before we start pushing on the other ones, or we'll end up with a couple of them. There's this untangling these references between the documents will need a little bit of work. These are the current, this is just like a little snapshot. I copy pasted out what the outline of the 2 documents are to kind of like what's in each. And I kind of want to draw attention. There's some of these little appendix things. So these are these other little bits that aren't really core to the repository, but they're things that we're referencing, like which cryptographic curves we're using, these other little identifiers that come along, and some of the details of the JSON CBOR data modeling, like mapping back and forth between JSON and CBOR. So those are, I think, attached pretty closely to the repository document, and that's why we ended up putting those in there. Oops, skip one. Okay, so there's a couple. Some of this is just kind of like confessing decisions I made in this drafting, and wanted to get some feedback on if I'm doing this right. These are some of the bigger RFC documents I've ever drafted. So we have this question of which cryptographic systems do we use in AppProto. The current system uses 2 curve types. Those were just kind of somewhat arbitrary decisions. I mean, not arbitrary, but we kind of made these calls, and we kind of want to not, like, is it appropriate to put those in RFCs? Probably not. Where should that decision get made? Where should those live? I put them in the repository document right now. I think the part of the mechanism for making a signature, which is that you take the commit objects, put them in CBOR format, hash them with SHA-256, and then sign that. That feels like that probably stays in that document, but which of these curves and cryptographic systems should we use, and what's the change process for that? How do we add new curves? I'm not quite sure where that should live. Maybe in the operational considerations document. That would be one of the later things that we get to. We probably want to get input from other people at the IETF around this. Daniel's going to touch on that a little bit more. We've got this data model section as an appendix in the repository thing. Again, I think that this is probably the place to do it. There's this question of floating point numbers, if we should add that to the data model. That'll be another talk later in this session. And then there's some other limits that I don't get into there. We'll probably put in the operational considerations around, like, what's the largest, how many bytes can a record be? Going to be a petabyte? Probably not. But that kind of, this is like, could use some IETF feedback on, like, where should those limits, it feels kind of like best current practice-y, not something we want to put in a standards track document. This referencing, how to reference between the repo document and the account identifier system, the way that you validate the signatures on a repository is to resolve the cryptographic keys currently associated with the account and use those. I'm not sure if we can just kind of say, this is out of this is out of scope for the repo document, and then later in that account ID document describe how that works, or if we need a normative reference between the two and how publication goes with that. I just don't have that much experience with that, but I would kind of lean towards just not getting into it too much in the repository document for now and put that reference back in later. There's this blobs thing. I think AppProto folks, or people that have worked with the protocol, probably are more familiar with this and know that it's like a pretty small piece of the protocol, but you can have these other media files that are stored on your home server alongside the repository. I think we could specify this pretty quickly. It would just be a small section to add to the repository part. It doesn't feel like it's worth having a whole other document about that later down the line. We could also jam it in the operational considerations, but I'd probably lean towards putting it in the repo document. So I'm gonna grab water. We have this little thing to untangle. This is another part of the untangling this bricks, that there's this framework of everything kind of references on each other, and we can't standardize everything at once. Part of the synchronization scheme involves these HTTP paths as things are written right now. We have this XRPC acronym in there, and that's one of those bricks that we might come back to in the future. And so in my mind, that's like a whole little framework. It's a whole little protocol that I'd rather just not get into right now as part of the synchronization and repository documents. But for interoperability, it's important to know which path to actually call these at. If you want to download the repository car file, you need to call one of these HTTP endpoints. So how do we get something out of this initial charter that's actually usable, people can actually interoperate on? But we're not trying to pull in this new future context. I would lean towards probably putting this in the operational considerations if we can do that, which like just kind of leaves the door open to iterating on this in the future. There's also this question of this has this com.appproto namespace, which is a domain name currently owned and registered by Blue Sky. maybe we want to move that to org.itf or some other namespace that's governed in a different way, but that's a whole, that's a new IANA registry maybe, or some other responsibility that'll need to be taken on. I would personally lean towards just having something, so the operational considerations feels like a way to put something in that's like, hey, here's how you do this today. This part might evolve or change over time. You're probably going to need some legacy compatibility for that going forward, but it would be a way to just kind of move forward. Amelia, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, for the com@proto or @proto.com domain, wasn't that discussed in the context of the trademark for @proto and bundling the two things together as this is a thing that is owned by whoever is overseeing the ATP group, whether that was the community, whether that was whatever the IETF trademark thing is, etc. In which case, we don't necessarily need to change the NSID for that.
That's possible. I mean, I think that's just still kind of open work, how that will land. But it's worth noting as you have that it touches on that discussion. I guess the last thing I would say on that API endpoint question, like there is this whole schema system and way of kind of like defining new API endpoints. I think specifically for these things like get repo that are like core to how the protocol operates, at least so far in the kind of like protocol development process, we've kind of said like, hey, these com.appproto things, they are special, and the real authority for those is the written specifications. Like the authority for those will end up being the IETF RFCs, not the resolution process. Like there's this way to resolve it, maybe similar to if you're familiar with old XML schema resolution. And so there's a question of like, oh, do you have to, is it what resolves when you resolve the schema that's authoritative, or is it the specification? I think we want it to be the specification that's authoritative for those schemas in particular. So that may be a way to kind of get around this a little bit for those specific endpoints. As kind of an omission or like a way when we were drafting, I tried to not get too much into the PDS and relay concept. In my mind, those are kind of operational. That's like kind of the current architecture of the protocol involves those. People talk about them, developers talk about them a lot, and it might be a missing thing to not define those terms or get into them in the system. But I think we can also potentially do it without having to define those roles. Maybe those roles won't exist in the future. But I've kind of left those out, but that might be a thing other people would object to. And then there's this question of like, where should we put privacy considerations? I think this was, I can't remember, but it might be even mentioned in the charter that we should get into privacy considerations, and where should that live? I would propose putting it, probably attaching it to the synchronization, like the network wire protocol and things like that. Did you want to jump in?
Ted Hardy, no relevant affiliation. For the privacy considerations, I would actually suggest that if you're going to have an architecture document, they belong there, because the overall system will have privacy that, or privacy risks, which are not relevant to one specific aspect, like a particular relay protocol. So I think if you're going to have an architecture document, then putting it in that is the sensible thing to do. If you're not going to have it, it's probably going to have to be a section in each of the others. And I strongly suggest you separate it out from the security considerations, because it's our past history that if you try and combine the two, you tend to do a good job at one and not the other. And that is suboptimal given the remit of the group. And since I bothered to come up to bother people at the mic line, I will go back up to your HTTPI endpoints comment and say, I don't think you should change this until there's a non-interoperable change, right? So keep it where it is for now. Once you've made a change to how get repo works, that would not be backward compatible. That would be the moment at which you would shift it into a new namespace and decide whether that new namespace needs to live somewhere different, because you actually want it to be a reference to say an XML schema maintained at IANA rather than what you would download. IANA actually has a set of URNs that can be referenced for IETF protocol parameters, and we can talk about that with the folks at IANA if you get to that point.
Cool, thanks. To go back to the architecture document, just to clarify on that, I'm not planning to publish that document. That was only ever just an internet draft informationally to help the IETF community understand the protocol. If people really want to push for it, like if the chairs or the director really want to push for that, or they think it's an important thing, I'm willing to maintain it. But right now it's just a text file out there on the internet.
Ted Hardy, I actually think you want the information somewhere. If you want to put it as a preface to some other document, I don't really care whether, you know, it belongs in some other document or a separate document. It's easier to rev if they're separate documents, because different pieces actually change at different times, which is actually something that Andy and I were talking about in the chat. The same is true for when you're talking about like what curves you use for signature. If you keep those in a separate document, if those change, you only have to rev that separate document, and that can be a document in which you talk about things like how cryptographic agility is going to work in the overall system. So I know it seems daunting to have a lot of little documents and to construct ways of the path dependencies among them. And for the time you're actually writing the first set of them, it's a giant pain. But it turns out for maintainability across the long term, it can be a real advantage if they tend to have changes that are not synchronous changes. If they are synchronous changes, then why bother? But if they tend to evolve in separate paces, that's useful.
Okay, thanks. Amelia, do you want to jump in on this before I wrap up?
Yeah, so for the privacy considerations, I agree with the previous point that was made about security considerations and merging them. From my experience working on other documents, we tend to have two sections, one for privacy and one for security. And then there are also security BCPs or best current practice documents that we can publish as well that cover the current state of art. So we can use those as well, I think.
Great, thanks. I think the queue's locked, but I'm almost done if you can wait just a minute.
No,
you're in
please
there.
not.
Sorry.
Yeah, Andy asked me to bring this to the mic. Yeah, really the endpoint should be a well-known service, and we need to get this to tie into SRV, and there's a whole load of things that, you know, I'll make more detailed set of comments later, but it's basically just bashing it into alignment with the standards process. But looking through the crypto piece, you know, you're using these curves and you've got this thing saying malleability or whatever. One of the reasons that we went through the whole CFRG thing on curve 25519, it's no better or worse than any other elliptic curve. They're all the damn same. But we did go through all these little nits and hammered them down. And so you can ride on top of that rather than having to hammer them down again.
I like 1000% agree. We do just have this, you know, maintaining current compatibility with what's deployed for this protocol. So that's just the balance. Like if we could start fresh, would totally just reference existing work. Okay, so this is like a little bit of a just burying the lead. I think merging the sync and repo docs would probably make sense. And so unless there's objection, I'm just going to copy a lot of the stuff from the sync document and put in the repo document. They awkwardly refer to each other. And even when I'm drafting, I have to flip back and forth between the two documents all the time. And I think just having them as one, it'll be a little bit long, but if I look around, there's a couple other RFCs that long. And then, I don't know, maybe we might end up doing something similar with the URI scheme. That seems to be a common pattern, is just define the URI in line. But at least for now, to start, I think, keep the URI a separate little document. I guess, referencing back to Ted's point, but that might be something that changes more quickly, and having it be a separate document could move things along easily. This is a separate little bit of just kind of like open issues. This is a little bit of a call for participation or just kind of issue tracking. There's this one little piece of the MST that we've never really nailed down, which is to define exactly which extra blocks are needed on the fire hose. We kind of do this tautologically right now. We say, include the extra blocks that you need to verify things, but how you know which blocks you need to verify it is a little open-ended. So we'll see if we can get some more input on this. We've taken a whack at it, I think, internally in the past, and never really came up with a satisfying definition. So hopefully we can come up with a good definition for this to put in the document. And that's it. So I have a little bit of a reminder of a couple of those main points. Otherwise, thanks for everyone's time.
Okay, thank you. Comment? One comment? No? Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Oh my God. All the slots for the request has been already taken. Oh, okay.
Is this working?
Yeah, I gave it. Okay.
Hey everybody, Daniel Holmgren, also from the Blue Sky team, and I'm one of the authors on both the repository and synchronization drafts. I'm going to be going over some of the possible changes for the IETF version of these drafts. These are changes that kind of Brian and I have talked about making to the drafts. I floated these on the mailing list maybe 2 weeks ago and got some feedback on them. Some of that feedback has been incorporated into these slides. And kind of the goal of this is to also just talk about the difficulty of making certain backwards incompatible changes in the network, like rating the different levels of difficulty and kind of giving a sense for maybe the scale of the sort of backwards incompatible changes that we're looking at, and get a sense of if that seems too adventurous for the network, or if people have a sense that we're going to be making even deeper cuts to the protocol than that. So a quick overview of that is kind of just giving a metric for the difficulty of these changes, and then getting into some of the changes that I floated around the repository commit, the cryptographic curves that we support, and the signing scheme, and then a few different things having to do with the synchronization protocol messages, framing of the WebSocket sub protocol, and then some things around the cursors for the synchronization protocol. So this is kind of a vague metric of how hard and disruptive certain changes in the network are to make. So AT is like a stateful data protocol. A lot of people are hosting data that is addressed. It's stateful, and we have these strong hash-based referential integrity links between them. So that means that changing historical data is often very difficult to coordinate, because we have to coordinate this across thousands or tens of thousands of different services, and it also breaks these references, and those broken references have cascading effects, because if you try to fix the broken reference and something references the record with the broken reference, then that reference is broken as well. So that's just a sense of these things that change the hash of records in the network are the hardest things to deploy. Things that don't touch the hash of records are much easier to deploy. So commit objects are probably, the commit of the repository is probably the simplest thing for us to change. That doesn't mean it's not hard to do. We have to roll this out to thousands and tens of thousands of different services in the network. But ultimately, I think that we can do that, and we can get the network to upgrade into that. Kind of similar with the sync wire protocol. That's a little bit more complex. There's a lot of tooling built around that, but again, I think that we can coordinate around that. Starting to get into the repository structure in the MST, that starts to get into pretty major data migrations that thousands of developers are going to have to perform over their data. It's not intractable, but it is much more difficult than the commit or the sync wire protocol. And then things like the URI format and the record data model, these things are in billions of records on the network right now. I just don't think that we're ever going to be able to fix that. That doesn't mean that we can't touch things like that, but I think that we are going to have to maintain, I think we are just going to have to specify that there are records out there like that, because I think it's just intractable to get those fixed up. So now I'm going to get into a few of the things that that we've chatted about as possible changes to the RFCs. The RFCs as they're drafted right now describe the system as it's currently deployed. These are kind of things that we would be looking at for the IETF version. So this is an example of the repository commit. On the left is how it looks today. On the right is what it could possibly look like. To call out the things that changed is we're adding this $sign type with the type of object that it is, just providing domain separation on the commit for the signatures, updating the version. Currently, they're version 3 commits. It would be updating it to version 4. We kind of have this like did-shaped hole in the RFCs that we're drafting. We talk about them in the RFCs as resolvable identifiers. Currently in the repository commit, they're referenced as DIDs. If we want to like pull that terminology out of there, someone on the mailing list proposed using repo for that. Other options could be account, ID conflicts with a lot of maybe like programming language, magical words, maybe identifier if we want to be verbose with it, but some sort of term in there. The best I've heard so far is repo, I think. There's also a prev field that was mainly kept around for backwards compatibility with version 2. In nearly every commit in the network right now, it's set to null. And I think in this version, we could just formally deprecate that field and say you don't have to have that in there anymore.
We got people in the queue. Do you want to?
Oh, yeah, sure. Alistair, do you want to hop in?
Yeah, Alistair Woodman. So do you have a plan at all for what happens if things start to be able to crack your algorithms? I mean, so...
The signing algorithm?
Yeah.
Yes, I'm actually going to get into that on the next slide. Or I don't know that we have a formal plan yet, but we have concepts of a plan. Yeah, so right now there's 2 curves that are supported in the network, NIST P256 or SEC P256R1. It's a common choice for ECDSA. It's supported by most HSMs. It seems like a common choice in a lot of IETF protocols. We also support SECP 256K1. The reason for that is that we were looking at like kind of the crypto ecosystem and seeing that there's a lot of consumer key management software that supports that curve type in particular. In hindsight, I'm not sure that we really reaped a lot of benefits from that. I think Eric Rescorla pointed out on the mailing list, possibly deprecating this. I don't feel like super tied to this. I think if we were to deprecate it, we would want to add in another option, at least one other option. And then possibly to add Edwards 25519. There's a lot of developer interest in this. I'm quite interested in doing this. It's a common ask. It's just like a lot of work to do, and so we haven't done it. Maybe it's not worth the hassle with quantum stuff looming on the horizon. Maybe we should just, if we're like looking into upgrading algorithms, maybe we should be putting our energy into that. And then post-quantum signatures. I'm not really an expert in that domain. My understanding is that like the current IETF recommendation is MLDSA.
Yeah.
It looks like a couple people in the queue.
Eric.
Yeah, I mean, MLDSA is what there is. Is an IETF. So I mean, you're not going to do SLHDSA, that's for sure. I mean, I can't see the value of adding ED25509 now. That seems like a weird choice. As I sort of said, like on the list, I mean, I think SEC P256K1 is like I know it's like the Bitcoin choice, but it's just like everyone else thinks it's a really idiosyncratic like choice. So I think like trying to get rid of that, like relatively, at some level of adjustment, we've quickly. I'm not sure I'd see why you. I think my inclination would be just to like add MLDSA and like and say we're gonna transition away from SEC P256K1 and kind of not do much else.
Are there more folks in the queue, or should I keep going?
There's more.
All right.
Hi, I was kind of hoping I'd get a chance to argue with Ecker about signatures, but he says that maybe ED25519 isn't worth it at this stage. That's what I was going to get in the line to say, basically. Like, and for the K256 curve, like that thing in the upper and lower S stuff, like with hash-based structures, like I really do think it would be great to get off of it soon. So if MLDSA is too hard, then we could buy the ED25519 argument. It's very stable in that way. But I think at this point, it's better to just go to MLDSA. So I'd be interested in which variant of MLDSA and like all those other details, and making sure that we don't have something like the upper and lower S problem with MLDSA, which I'm pretty sure doesn't exist, but I'm not really a cryptographer. Thanks.
Great. Thanks.
Oh, and I'm Ori Steele.
Yeah, maybe.
Hey,
We
Megan.
got two more. So Bungo, please.
It seems like there's a choice of like, are we going to fix like one or two curves in the repo document, which may be merged with other ones? And like, there's a choice to make of having an open registry or like factoring out the specific curve choice altogether. But if the docs are going to merge, it's like hard to even have that conversation right now. So it feels like we need to either not merge those documents so that, we need to figure out what the documents even are, adopt them into the group, and as soon as they are in the group, maybe ask for advice from either CFRG or a secure, like some other groups that are familiar with how to do this. And I guess the question is, do you get the sense that you want to just choose two curves, like one elliptic curve and one post-quantum, or you want to like not be generic over the crypto curve, leave that out of the general architecture or repo document? Do you want to fix the curves, or do you want to define this abstract to the curves?
That's a good question. I don't know that I have a super strong opinion on it. My sense is probably to define it abstractly, but I do still think that we need to ground like the interoperability in a particular set of curves. So if that looks like a registry, or I don't know exactly what that looks like.
David Skenazy, I didn't think I would be arguing about cryptography today. Hooray. No, you've got it exactly right. You're going to need some level of registry for the future, so you can evolve things. But every time you add a new curve, you add an opportunity for implementations to no longer interoperate.
Right.
So you're going to need a mandatory to implement. Like that's pretty much what TLS did. And for this, any one curve you add will cause you pain and this ability to dissect. So I would say keep this number as small as possible, and maybe, keep the one that's been supported thus far, keep a post-quantum one, and then have a registry for the future. That's your best guess at keeping it really simple and not forking the community with some implementations not being able to talk to others.
Sweet, thank you.
Yeah. So Eric.
Yeah. So first, I think just a technical point. MLDSA is not a curve. I mean, like I think signature algorithm is the right level of abstraction. We made this mistake in TLS of using the word curve to like refer a group to refer to like to key exchange algorithms when we thought we were doing Diffie-Hellman, and like all the terminology is screwy now because like MLChem isn't a group system. So I think that's the first point. The second point is I think David's totally right. We need like a migration story. Like I don't quite understand what the story is even here. Like say we added any new thing, no matter what it is, right? The problem is that as Brian is now saying, there's no negotiation, right? And so you need to have some story about like how do you roll out a new algorithm in a world where you don't know what the new people support, and that's actually a much more serious problem than like exactly what we choose. Is like how do we have a story about how you make any migration at all? And I don't know if that's been discussed, but that's probably a thing we have to deal with. And it goes two ways, right? Because like how do I roll out I can't sign with a new thing until everybody supports it, and I can't like deprecate my old thing until like so it's like having such a story there is quite key.
Yeah, that's a great point. And yes, any change like this is going to take a lot of care to roll out. As I said, commits are probably the easiest thing for us to update, and these signatures are on commits. Like right now, I think that there's enough coordination in the network that something like this could be rolled out with quite a bit of care, which is not to say it wouldn't be a huge pain, but I think that we could pull it off.
Yeah, I think maybe now, but like if this really works, then it's getting much harder, right? I mean, this is probably the most closest analogy we have here is DNS, right? Where DNSSEC basically like these are one-way communications, and and it's been a real problem to upgrade algorithms in DNSSEC. So I think you're going to need like duplicate signatures for a very long time, concurrent signatures for a very long time. You're going to need rules around to manage it. So like we need to write some migration rules at some point pretty soon.
Yep.
Okay, I'm going to lock the queue for now and let Daniel finish.
Okay, sweet. I have a few slides to get through still. So in the synchronization draft, there's kind of 4 messages that go out over the synchronization protocol. These are examples of those 4 messages: commit, sync, account, and identity. We have some similar changes to make to this as to the commit objects, which are basically there's some fields on these that reference DIDs, updating those to reference repos. and then just deprecating a few unused fields that were kept around for backwards compatibility purposes, two big blobs and handle on the identity event. For framing on the WebSocket, we have this kind of WebSocket sub protocol for events that go out over it. Currently, that looks like two CBOR objects that both get CBOR encoded and then concatenated, which is valid CBOR. There's sort of this problem that a lot of CBOR libraries don't really know how to parse that or work with it. It's kind of led to friction for certain developers. And so one thing that we're interested in is reworking that framing protocol so that it's just a single object that goes over with the type so that these things can be processed generically, and then the payload of it that can get handed off to the application. There's a problem with, so generally these subscriptions work with monotonic sequence numbers that a consumer can keep track of and know where they dropped off and pick back up on the stream in the same spot. The problem with this is that cursors are currently sent on the messages on the protocol. And so if you subscribe to a low throughput host, consumers may connect and then never get a cursor before the connection runs out. And then drop off and come back on and kind of not know what they meant. There's basically this weird problem where you're not getting an update on the cursor if you left for a bit and then came back. And so one thing that we could do is introduce a new info type of message that basically tells a consumer what the current cursor is whenever they connect. It's helpful for low throughput hosts like this to basically get their bearings. It's very cheap to send out on startup of the subscription. And then there's been some discussion about maybe alternate sequence types. Like right now, the sequence numbers are kind of arbitrary monotonic sequence numbers by the provider. That makes it very difficult to switch between two different sync providers. If one of them goes down and you want to jump over to another one, they probably have a totally separate history of their cursor numbers. In past versions of the sync protocol, it was very important that you never drop a message. Now this is more easily identifiable and recoverable. That maybe gives us some wiggle room on this. Some services that developers run in the network use time-based cursors to allow for easy cutover rather than these kind of arbitrary sequence numbers. Maybe we could introduce some sort of semantic for time-based cursors into the synchronization protocol, or maybe offer a way that allows both options, either the monotonic sequence numbers if you want to ensure that you never miss a message from a given host, or time-based if you want to be able to easily switch between two different providers. And then I'm going to wrap up real quick because I just have one slide left, and then we can do questions. And then another semantic that we're kind of interested in, this has been something that's a common ask from developers, is hanging on to past versions of records in an authenticated way in the repository. In these past, but this would be an optional thing that you could do. So for instance, if you have a post or something in your repository, you make an edit to it and you want to keep around an authenticated copy of the previous version of it, storing it in the repository, this would require an update to the ATURI format that would basically add another component to it that is the hash of the record or the CID of the record. That would structurally, since the repository is lexicographically ordered, it would structurally place them adjacent to the current version of the record. This intersects with the discussion on URIs, obviously, and we can get into it there. This is probably a deeper one, but I basically wanted to signpost it and say that we're interested in supporting this. Yeah, sweet. So that's basically an overview of everything. We got a couple minutes left if people want to hop in with any questions or kind of just thoughts on the scope of this.
Okay, Tom.
Tom Hertz. Recently, I did a full network study for a month to understand it a bit better for my research group. And one of the struggles also mentioned by you was the cursor system, because I wanted to look at it from different providers. But the question for me, including the blog post by Brian, was how feasible it is to still use the time-based cursor for layovers between different providers as the network grows, because the more commits we get, the more I would assume that a time-based cursor will probably differentiate between different providers.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, that is the trade-off with the time-based cursor, is that it does differ between different providers. With these fire hoses, generally low latency is pretty important. And so I would expect that between kind of reputable providers, it's not going to differ by more than a few seconds or something like that. but obviously there's clock drift on machines, and they're going to be crawling these records at different rates, and there's different partitions in the network. So that is the downside of it, is you lose out on those guaranteed, the completeness guarantee from the cursor, and you have to recover that from the data structure, basically.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. We move on.
All right, I'm back. So the previous one, to be clear, was like that early work is like pretty active. So we're really looking for sooner, like nearer term feedback on the scoping and how to merge things. And like, I didn't hear a ton of objections, so I'll probably go ahead with a lot of the changes I presented. This one is like a little bit like just throwing this problem out a little early. In terms of timelines, I'd be kind of disappointed in myself if we didn't have something that we could bring to the group by the next IETF in San Francisco for the repo and sync stuff. But for this URI thing, I'm kind of guessing we're going to be just getting into this, or like trying to brainstorm and come up, like just starting to draft on these URI issues between now and then. So I'm not trying to push like really hard and fast to get consensus on this. I just wanted to bring it. It's a gnarly problem, so I wanted to bring it early and let people start thinking about it when they're eating pizza. All right, so I'm going to go over kind of what the current syntax is, like what's nice about the current @URI thing, what the problem is specifically in terms of URI syntax, some possible, then one category of approach we could take here is changing. I'm kind of just replicating some of this. I wrote a blog post about this and sent an email out on the mailing list. So I'm kind of just going over a lot of this again. But some potential syntax changes we could make. Maybe another option is try to get the IETF URI generic syntax rules changed. That's like moving the mountain. A lot of people are going to not like that. But I kind of want to poke on it a little bit and see just how big and heavy that mountain is. It seems like it's probably very big and very heavy, and we don't want to climb up there. And then some other kind of like pragmatic comments on all this, like what is this, regardless of what we do, does it all really even matter a little bit? And then what I think, like kind of proposing some next steps for this. So I would say if you have comments, if you have meta comments on this whole thing, maybe leave those to the end of this. If you have little comments along the way, maybe also just like put them in the chat or something like this. I kind of want to try to structure this a little more as like discussion at the end instead of like nitpicking everything, little thing as we go on. So just as a reintroduction to, how the generic comment, the URL-y kind of flavor of URIs are usually a scheme. There's an authority section, which often has maybe some user info, a host name or an IP address, and then path segments. It's a little more complicated than this, but that's kind of the general flavor. The @URI, like one of the big ideas of @proto is that we put the account identifier in the authority section instead of a network location, and you resolve that account. There's another layer of indirection where you can resolve the account identifier to a network location, the current network location. But doing things this way means the accounts can move between network locations without changing the URIs. They're like cool URLs. They don't change when you move between different locations in the network. And here's some examples of @URIs using the two current supported account identifier resolution schemes, which are did PLC and did web. Some of the things that are nice about this, like they're pretty friendly. They look kind of like URLs or URIs. Like people are pretty, like common folks are pretty familiar with these : URLs. I don't think I've seen anyone with a tattoo quite yet, but I see lots of like stickers of these with @ : I have one on my laptop right now. I have like a magnet at home. It's kind of this thing that has some energy behind it. There's no escaping or encoding needed at all with the AT URIs right now. They are URIs, and URIs do have this generic % encoding thing. But as we've structured and kind of specified things right now, you never need to do that. You never need to do a pass to remove % encoding, because there's nothing that needs to be % encoded in theory in the current URIs. So they're nice and normalized. There's no like optional slashes at the end. We're kind of strict about how all that works. So you just have these nice, clean, like they're kind of always normalized URIs. And the account identifiers are just pasted right in there verbatim. It's very easy to see that that's what it is. You don't have two different forms of it. developers don't get confused, users don't get confused. You can just parse them in and out. And the current syntax has all these properties, it has all this great stuff, and it's deployed. There's just billions of these strings out there in these content address records. So there's just like a bunch of these strings that look like that out there that we're going to need to deal with going forward. The problem is that you can't, this just doesn't work with the RC 3986 URI syntax rules. When I went, we went back and reread it really carefully. If you use the // you have to follow the authority rules, that it has to match like a registerable name or an IPv4 or an IPv6 in there. And that's like kind of doubled down on in the IANA URI registry rules, which specifically mention this. It's like, if you didn't do the // you don't have to follow those rules. But if you did do the // you got to do that part. And it's like, oh, damn. Sorry, this was kind of my fault that we ended up in this position. I reread these documents over and over again and somehow convinced myself we didn't need to do it. But now it's very clear to me when I go back, it's not like there's an error in the documents. You just need to do it this way. And this is already starting to, as people are trying to use these URIs, there's no problems within the app proto ecosystem right now. Like, people mostly just write their own little URI parser for these in their kind of like SDKs for app proto. Everything works well within the repositories. They work fine in the bodies of API requests and stuff like that. But if you start trying to use these as URIs in other contexts, it's starting to cause problems. A good example is people trying to put these in like link rel alt HTML metadata, and then suddenly your HTML doesn't strictly validate because there's expected to be a URI in there and it's not a URI. And we want people to take these cool URIs that don't change and spread them all around the web, spread them all around in other places. And if they're not strictly IETF URIs, that's causing problems. So a couple ways to, a couple ideas we've had, some changes we could make to the URI syntax to get around this, to get them back onto the valid path. One is to change, don't make it : //. We could do 3, 3 is better, have 3 slashes. You have an empty authority scheme. It's kind of subverting the URI concept, but it kind of works. You lose this idiomatic prefix, you lose some like style points or like philosophy. This feels a little like we're doing something a little bit dirty, but you don't have any escaping or coding. And the identifiers are just right in there. It's just a single character change. Another approach would be to remove the //. You have AT:, but now you're still like, oh, what is this? Is this a URI? Is it a did? It's like a little weird. I can tell everyone is chatting furiously. All of these, it's like an energy in the room. Another approach would be to do the percent encoding. So just take those colons, encode them. No one likes this. I'm glad other people. I point at you get both. You have to do it escaping. You maybe need to double escape. If you put these in a URI query parameter, you're got to escape the percents then, right? And you don't have this visibly. It's not as nice when you look at it. It's not obviously your did when you see it there. So you lose a bunch of stuff when you do that. We could come up with some clever transforms. Maybe we map these down. Like, this is probably, again, kind of doing it dirty. People won't like this because what's .did? plc.did, where did that come from? That's not a TLD. Are we reserving these? Are we trying to get a special TLD like .onion? This is just going to be more process. It's not great. Maybe we do them with dashes or underscores or other things that make them clearly not valid local host names. Like, it's not a host name, but it could be a valid DNS name. It could fit the syntax. Anyways, this is a approach we could take. The big gnarly one would be trying to get the URI rules changed. So we could try to restructure things where the authority section still has some character set limits. That would be basically the same character set limits, but there wouldn't be the substructure in the same way. So in a SDK or a library, you'd parse out, you'd get a string for the authority and optional other stuff, or something special for DIDs, but we're trying to not bake in DIDs. We want to leave these resolvable account identifiers a little bit more flexible. This is just going to be hard. I kind of want to at least poke a little bit more, like get a little bit more feedback, including this presentation in this room about this, but I don't think we can bet the farm on it, kind of. And even if we got the RFCs changed, like, there's just a ton of code out there in the world. It's a hard it's, getting the RFCs changed doesn't change all that code that's out there. There's still going to be problems. One approach is just don't call them URIs. I think people have kind of indicated of this, like they look like URIs, they walk like URIs, but we could just call them identifiers of another type. This feels a little off to me. Everyone's going to be confused. People are going to try to use them as URIs, et cetera, et cetera. And then I want to just kind of broach, I'm at least personally like very confident we need to at least specify the current string syntax, acknowledge that they're not valid URIs, but they're out there. Proto implementations are going to need to parse these out of records that are content addressed and around there. So there's going to need to be this kind of like legacy support for the existing strings. And if you need to do that legacy support, will folks just keep doing this? And so that almost kind of points at this don't call them URIs thing, which is, are there always going to be two versions of this? And how do we stop people from putting them out? Do we try to come up with a transition where we really go say like, oh no, stop omitting those. You're really not supposed to do it that way. You're supposed to only use the correct URI syntax. So to me, so this is the thing. We've got time. There's no, totally hanging sword over our heads, but we do want to get some deadlines for wrapping up this charter. We're going to have to get to it at some point. My kind of proposed next steps here are take the existing syntax rules, which are invalid to be clear, but just write that up in an IDE so we have something very informal that we can point people to and talk about the problem. Probably send it over to the URI, send this whole thing over to the URI review list as a, hey, look at this big mess. What are your thoughts? I just think that's like a thoughtful group of people. I don't want to waste their time or say, hey, this is your problem, like tell us what to do. But I want to, if we're going to do it, like I think it should be like at least a clean, maybe not my personal blog post or something that we send over, like send an ID over, say like, here's the dilemma we have, here's what we're thinking. And my guess is we're going to have this conversation again, but maybe we can, but maybe by the next one we can be getting more like, okay, let's be kind of driving towards consensus. So sorry again to everyone. Thank you for everyone's input on this. And we can go to the queue.
Okay. Ted.
Hey, Brian. My name's Ted. How are you?
Great.
I was going to say no relevant affiliation, but actually one of the authors of the registration document. One of the principal things that registration document does is trying to make sure that there are no collisions. And I really appreciate your coming early and getting the feedback from the list there to make sure that you are picking a string so that there's no collision between what you're using and something else. That's something you did well, and I wanted to call it out early because it's not really the best thing that happened after that. And your representation of the generic syntax of URIs in this presentation is actually wrong. Because what you're focused on is URIs which use an authority. And I think you've got some things you can do here that are relatively simple if you decide, hey, it turns out I don't love slashes so much. You can take very much what you've got now and do AT:, the did, PLC:, and go from there, and it will look exactly the same as what you have here, and it will be a perfectly valid URI because you will, instead of having an authority there, you will be having, your BNF will say that the set of things which can appear here are valid did methods or valid did methods plus registrations which occur in the following IANA registry. Yeah. So that's a valid URI, and it's a very simple transform what you have now. You're going to miss the cute slashes, and I think you should just put them away and say, they were great. They were the slashes of my youth. I'll always miss them. But it's time to become a man, or a woman if you are one, or a non-binary pal if you're a non-binary pal. Any of those, but we're going to just move into the actual URI syntax here. All of the other things that you've described, other than putting away the slashes, are hacks. And they may be valid hacks if you really want to go there and you can leave the slashes behind. We can help you find a hack. But that's the simple thing to do. I will also point out here that, one, congratulations, you're in the IETF. Haha, you have a charter. Changing the URI syntax ain't in your charter, so you can do that in this group. If you decide you want to change the URI syntax, you get to go and ask dispatch where to go. I don't suggest you do that. without having had calming beverages beforehand and a large supply of them after, because I can tell you that they're not going to tell you to go anyplace fun. I really do think that we can get you someplace sensible here if you're willing to just say, I'm going to bite the bullet and go straight to URI syntax. If you're not willing to do that and you want to call these something other than URI, life goes on. The colon and slash are not particularly special in the world. But you're going to have to figure out some out-of-band way to signpost that very strictly, because otherwise you're going to run into parsers that think, hey, this looks like a URI, and I'm going to behave that way. We actually just recently processed a document that's finding ways for researchers to reference URIs that are to malware sites or similar, so that they are not automatically parsed by parsers. And it is complicated to just get all those parsers out there that want to see anything with a colon and a couple of slashes as a URI from doing their erstwhile best. And that signposting is going to be almost as hard as just going straight to the URI, the syntax that actually works. So happy to help with all of this. Have a great day.
Thanks for your patience.
Hi, I didn't get the memo that Thursday open mic night at the Comedy Club got moved, but I am excited. Hi, everyone. My name's David Skenazy. I'm a veteran of the RFC 6874 wars. For most of you that don't remember, that was the last time we tried and failed to change the URI syntax. The idea was, IPv6 addresses are great, but we want to put the scope ID for link local addresses in there. I failed to find words that are polite to describe how that went down. It turned into a fight between the IPv6 side of the house and the HTTP side of the house, and then we realized that actually URIs don't matter because the What Working Group ran away with URLs, and that's what the web uses. And anyway, I could go on and on. Ted did a great job explaining the world of hell that you would find yourself in if you tried to do that. Ask me over drinks about the small portion of it I experienced. I think Ted summarized it well. If you don't want to change what you have, call it a string. If you're willing to change it somehow. I think, dropping the slashes is the simplest change. But if you're changing, might as well change it to the ideal thing in what you think it is. But don't, please, for your own sake.
But you did it, so there's a chance.
Oh no, it wasn't. I was oh no, we didn't. We got rolled back. I was a bystander. I just have scars and we accomplished nothing.
Hi. Justin Richer, welcome to the IETF, guys. I do want to call back to, so I helped chair the BOF for this, and I do want to call back to, when you come to the IETF, they will call your baby ugly. I'm really glad that you realized this particular dimension of baby ugliness early, because now's the time to dig in and figure out what direction that you want to take. I don't think there is a good answer here. The worst answer is hoping that you can change URI. Because, and I was going to bring this up if David hadn't, what WG effectively owns that as much as the IETF doesn't want to admit it. Sorry, guys. And so, although those are living documents, maybe you could get them to change it. Who knows? No, don't do that. That was a joke, for the record. Regardless, I think that it's ultimately going to be a syntax or a semantics change here. Regardless, I don't think it can just. It obviously can't live how it is because it doesn't line up with the definitions, and so that. Since you're already looking at places where backwards compatibility and mapping to backwards compatibility is going to have to be an explicit thing, I don't think that's the worst thing in the world. I think that you can either decide that, hey, it's a syntax change and we have a transform for syntax change and we realize what that means, or it's a semantics change and you pretend it's not a URI and then you go out of your way to warn everybody that, no, it's not really a real URI, so don't treat it like one. It just starts with something that smells like one, and you do run into all the problems that was talking about earlier. But but that is a choice. So yeah, I don't think there's an easy way out, but here we are.
Okay, thank you. So please keep short.
I'll try to keep jokes out of this. So yeah, the charters talks about how cryptographic verification ensures existential and forgeability of repository data. And I think like that's what we want. That's what we should focus on. And I'm hearing different things on like, it's hard to migrate an existing network, so we need to document how it currently works, maybe even verify whether the current network provides that. But this was a whole discussion of like, there's several discussions here of like things we could do. And I just think a lot of that should come later once we have work items in the group, and we're even, so that we can focus on like the high priority here of the cryptographic guarantees that are in the charter. And then I guess the question is, what things by the next IETF will be called for adoption? Like what work are you going to do before the next IETF so that all this feedback is going into working group items and not some company's thing? Are there any documents that you'll do before the next?
My feeling, like I'm pushing on the repo and sync docs, and I kind of expect those to go forward first. And this URI thing, I'm just kind of planting the conversation topic.
Hi, I'm Marco Sabatello. I'm one of the co-authors of the W3C DIT standard. As a DIT person, I love the idea of building DITs fundamentally into URI syntax. But as others have pointed out, I think it's might be difficult. Could you go back to the slide maybe where you have the three triple slash option and the other option? I wanted to point out two things here. First of all, the triple slash option, it's not that weird. I think there are other URI schemes that do that. For example, the file URI scheme, you can have file : triple slash, which is perfectly valid and well understood. And the option without any slash, I think there is one issue here that hasn't been discussed yet in the mailing list, which is that in the DIT standard, we also have a concept of a DIT URL where the DIT can have a path. And I think if you use the syntax without any slash here, and then you have a path, then semantically that path might be considered to be owned by the DIT and by the DIT method, which could mean that the path might be dereferenced in a DIT method specific way, which is, I think, not what we want here. Whereas if you have the triple slash, then the DIT is one segment in the URI, and the path would be fully controlled by the outer URI scheme AT, which I think is what we want here. So that's what I wanted to point out. There is also the option with a single slash here, right? That hasn't been discussed. That might be.
Yeah, I can't remember. The single slash might invoke the parsing. Some other people at other points in time have mentioned like just use the did path thing. I'm kind of against that. I think it should be clear that we're talking about AT, and I'm pretty sure we could come up with a URI syntax saying that it needs to be the account identifier without any other path. So I think we could resolve that part.
So back when Phil Humbaker, back when I was young, 35 years ago, when we added the double slash to the HTTP and FTP methods, the reason that they're there is so that you can do relative directions. So that when you've got one URI and you give a partial one later on in a document, that it can say, here is a new authority, here is a new here's a thing that starts in the root path in that authority. And so that's why they were added in. So I really don't like the triple slash any more than the double. I think that gets you into saying this is a URI that you can interpret as a relative URI to something else. You can't. So let's just get rid of the slashes altogether. And I think that the last one, AT:, actually is going to be the one that you want, because what you have there is something that means the same thing, irregardless of where you are interpreting it from. So that's the correct approach, I think.
Okay. Sorry, Jan, very short one.
Of course, Jan Lemblad, W Social. I just wanted to point out, you mentioned earlier that the parsing doesn't need to care about percents, character encoding and stuff like that, and that's very nice. But if you call this not a URI, I think I'm actually at the liberty of percent encoding every single character in my data, and you should be able to parse that anyway. Just wanted to point it out.
Thank you. Okay.
right, thanks.
Eli, yeah.
Hello, can everyone see and hear
You
me?
have the control.
Okay, thank you. Okay, excellent, excellent. Thank you very much for the invitation. Today, I'm going to be talking about at Proto over media over quick transport, which is some work that we just concluded. So my name is Eli Mallon. I am the founder and CEO of Streamplace. If Blue Sky is using the @ protocol to make a Twitter analog, we are using it to make Twitch and YouTube do a first approximation. I was just minding my own business last March. I had been running a streaming platform that used primarily RTMP ingest and WebRTC playback, and I've been pretty happy with how that's been going overall. And all of my video engineer friends were getting more and more excited about this thing called media over quick. And I'd looked into it a little bit, but I was like, oh, I don't know. I mean, we still need to support these other protocols. It's not supported everywhere yet. So let's get good at these other things first. And then in March, 2 Cisco engineers dropped onto the IETF mailing list this draft for doing @proto data, specifically the relay role in the @proto ecosystem using media over quick. And nothing derailed my technical roadmap in a way that nothing really has in recent memory, because it's like, oh, I can just start doing this one protocol and use that for all of our media things and use that for all of our @proto data. You can even synchronize it to the browser with web transport. So I had to throw away the whole technical roadmap and we're doing this instead. All we're talking about here is currently in sort of the generalized @proto architecture. You have a connection between a PDS and a relay that goes over a WebSocket. Relays aggregate all of the different PDSs and go to app servers, formerly app views, and then app servers and clients can of course use whatever protocols they want to sync. But a common choice is to use what's called the Jetstream, which is like a simplified version of the @proto C-ROR relay firehose. And theoretically, we could use media over quick transport for all of these different roles. The work that we've just completed is, and have in production in Streamplace, is between the relay. So we've implemented a relay server, and then Streamplace as a consumer of that, as a client in there. I'm going to do, there's lots of good overviews on what media over quick is, so I'm just going to try and give a very, very quick sort of what is mock for @proto engineers here. It stands for media over quick transport. Quick is, of course, the UDP protocol that was designed to be the basis of HTTP3. It's being standardized down the hall. The authors of this draft would be in the room, actually, except we happen to have it scheduled. So for future meetings, I've asked if these two meetings can be listed as a conflict with each other. The fundamental basis here is it's a big global caching, publish subscribe system. And it was created to replace big HTTP CDNs. So video technology still has, it still looks a lot like putting a caching Nginx or Cloudflare or something in front of a media server and caching all of the media that moves through it, right? And there's been a lot of like Apple's LLHLS proposal and a CMAF. There's been a few attempts to modernize this a little bit, but this is like behind the scenes. Most live video you watch is still like making HTTP requests and caching at that layer. So everybody's sick of that, which is why we've been able to get such consensus around media over quick. Yeah, like I said, all of the video engineers I know are very, very excited about this. And this has a lot of promise to replace a great deal of inadequate protocols that we currently use for media broadcast. So why is it a good fit? For @proto data, the biggest one is everything right now is handled over WebSockets. WebSockets map to a single TCP connection. From just what I was measuring yesterday, I was getting about 17 megabits per second over the Firehose. We are all, of course, in this room hoping @proto will scale 100x, hopefully 1000x someday, and you will just absolutely run into scalability issues attempting to send all of that data over a single WebSocket. And so, if you need to go find somebody that knows how to broadcast lots of data at the gigabit and terabit scales, you're going to talk to video engineers. So that, in one sense, this is just a replacement, sort of a drop-in replacement for WebSockets with much higher throughput, lower latency, and better caching parameters. But to me, the real headline here, as I mentioned on the mailing list, is that we can, doing this would allow us to use commodity media over quick relays. And we've tested this successfully in the ATMOC project. So currently, the relay architecture in @proto looks something like this. You've got sort of the root relay. And then if you're going to fan it out, Blue Sky has this piece of software called Rainbow that sits in front of them and sort of handles fanning out that to lots and lots of different servers. Rather than doing that with bespoke architecture in the media over quick world, we could do this with commodity mocked relays that are being worked on at Akamai, Cisco, Cloudflare, a lot of giant companies. So it really just sort of slots in @proto here and gives us this really, really good gigabit, terabit scaling without having to design all of our own software and relays and that sort of thing. So this is what I think is the really exciting thing for me. So what do we have right now? And I'll get into sort of the protocol considerations in a moment, but so currently we didn't implement a full relay. It's sort of a proof of concept sitting in front of an actual relay that aggregates stuff. Yes, thank you for clarifying, Brian. There's not a single source of truth relay in @proto. I just mean to say this is, if you were operating one of many @proto relays and you wanted to scale it up, you would currently use this sort of bespoke software that goes in front of it. There's not like a single signer or something like that. We have a 72-hour replay window via group IDs. I'll get into the sort of primitives of this in a moment. There's a Rust server, the Rust Go and TypeScript libraries, and we're live in production right now with the streamplace.network relay that we're operating there, which you can try right now. I spun it up in Frankfurt for this just to see if I could really blow everybody in Vienna away with the low latency. So sort of mapping some things onto here and some of the particular capabilities we get from this. So events, the standard events in the @proto Firehose map onto objects. These would be frames in the media ecosystem. One thing we don't have in existing relays that I've sort of added on here. So users in this become tracks. Just like you can request audio in English or audio in French or something like that, you can now request different users in the same way. So this allows you to listen to, if I only care about 50 users events at any point, so I can request that directly from the relay and get it very efficiently. We have this existing concept of a cursor. Brian, I think, actually sort of summarized some of the sort of ambiguous state of the cursor pretty well. I won't get into that, but one thing we don't have is groups. So it would be a little bit, for maximum efficiency on this, you probably don't want to individually address every single event from every single user. So you instead bundle them up into groups. In the media world, this is like one group of pictures, keyframe intervals, so like a keyframe followed by a bunch of iframes. Yeah, that's like the caching unit basis in this. So this is one way. The sequence numbering is one thing that's sort of changed in this here. And then, yeah, the subscribe repos synchronization mechanism becomes the subscribe live edge at mock request, or a media over quick request, I should say. So this is the IETF. We're here to standardize. So coming out of this work, there were a couple different pieces that I think could be very helpful to standardize and get a handle on. The first one is whether this, and one reason I do think the sort of defining the relay role in the IETF work is that it would allow us to, so when we're talking about broadcasting over commodity media over quick relays, we're talking about unidirectional broadcast without sort of client negotiation. So the question is, what format do we send down that wire, right? Until recently, there was just one sort of fire hose format, which was this sort of two concatenated CBOR objects with a header and a payload. Recently, Blue Sky introduced, there's like that became CBOR v0. There's also CBOR v1, which puts them both in one CBOR object, as well as a canonical JSON format. I think, so that sort of precludes, unless I rebroadcast, I can broadcast everything 3 times in 3 different formats. But because we're talking about unidirectional broadcast, I have to sort of choose which one we're doing there. So, the analogy is like, if we were going to send all of this data via satellite or something like that, what format would we want to use? And I'm happy to use a variety of formats, but what we can't do is two-way negotiation as to what format we want to use there, right? This is strictly unidirectional broadcast. And so if we want this to be like a drop-in replacement for WebSockets, and we think this is valuable, all of these apps are going to have to speak whatever format this relay speaks anyway. So I don't know, maybe we drop this negotiation piece. The other one here is this sort of comes down to, so I went out and did a big survey. There are, to my knowledge, 5 complete implementations of an app proto relay right now. And all of them have slightly different cases on data handling. So there's this sort of notion that relays should be generally permissive of invalid data or data that they don't immediately recognize, because we want them to be future compatible. We might add more stuff, more fields to add proto in the future, and we don't want relays to be, immediately breaking because not everything is in there. But so what I've produced here, you can take a look at the link, is a series of tests that run against all 5 relay implementations. And all of them sort of disagree on what should and shouldn't get passed through from PDSs to everybody else. And when things do fail, the behavior on that failure is different. Indigo tends to dump the entire incoming connection from the PDS. There are, a variety of different ways we can go in there. My loosely held advocacy here would be that we should be strict around passing DAG-CBOR, also called Drizzle, the IPFS Dazzle project's a Drizzle specification, which is specifying the CBOR encoding, the key ordering, all of these sorts of things. Let's all speak that, because then we're speaking the base format, and crucially we can content address it well. But be tolerant to sort of unknown at proto-semantics, right? If somebody includes other dollar prefixed fields or that sort of thing, pass those through, but don't let just arbitrary CBOR through. There's a lot of ways to do it, but it's a very inconsistent patchwork in the real world. So that seems like something we could be standardizing. I've just got one more slide I'll go through and then call you up, Amelia. I just want to say thanks to Suhas and Fluffy Jennings for dropping the draft and completely derailing my technical roadmap, to Richard Barnes for getting us all connected, and to Brian Newbold for soliciting this presentation.
Okay, Amelia.
Yeah, so on the previous slide that you had there, Eli, I'm wondering, can this conformance test suite be used as a input to create issues for each of these weird cases and where things are not handled consistently, and used as an input document on, I think, the synchronization specification or internet draft, sorry. Could we use it as an input document for that? and like create
Yeah.
issues in the issue tracker for the synchronization spec.
I think that's a great idea. I mean, yeah, we'd probably have to start with like identify every disagreement, and decide what we want the sort of approved behavior to be. Yeah, I think that's definitely what the process should look like. Something we haven't finished quite yet, but I want to have off of this would be a fully. Currently, this is This was produced by sort of instrumenting all of these different PDSs, all of these different relays. I would like to have like just a fully external, like throw any relay at a test suite and get a result.
That would make sense. And yeah, I know for like W3C standards groups, we have these sort of conformance test suites. I'm not sure in W3C context what that is. So.
Right on. Cool. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now you have the control. Oops, sorry.
I think the order changed, so these aren't my slides.
You want the control.
Sorry, these aren't my slides. I think the order changed. ATP and floats is.
Sorry, this.
Phil's is the block order.
This is the floats.
Okay, well, I'll start while the slides load. I'm Fig, or Phil, from Microcosm. This is my second IETF, first time presenting. Microcosm runs protocol infrastructure and data services used by hundreds of AppProto apps, and we have implementations of both spec drafts running in production. I want to bring up a problem in the current repository spec draft that I think is going to force a decision we need to make, which is we actually need a way to signal whether our repository archives blocks are stream ordered or not. If the slides are stuck on this one, and
we're working on it. Just continue.
Okay. So we have this spec should in the repository spec that says, yeah, there we go. So producers, so that's PDSs, should emit blocks in pre-order, traversal, and parsers must tolerate other orderings. The block ordering section then makes the claim that this enables parsers to avoid buffering most of the blocks when they're stream ordered. I'm asserting that this claim under the parsers tolerant must without an explicit signal is false. So this actually matters quite a lot because buffering blocks for non-stream ordered repositories is a huge driver of current backfill design, which means that it affects almost every app that wants to build on the AT specs at some level. In particular, it affects Microcosm, where we target full network services that scale down to run on small and affordable servers. So this is a 1% sample of repository archives on the live network, bucketed by repository size. So blue is the number of repositories in that bucket, and red is the sum of the sizes of those repositories in that bucket. So the total data weight on the network represented by each bucket of repository size. So even though almost all repositories on the network are small, the blue bars, first two buckets under 1 megabyte is most of the network. The bulk of the actual total data in the network resides in repositories which are large. So 80% of all data in the network is in the repositories that are over 1 megabyte. And that's where stream processing starts to matter. So this really determines how you do things like backfill, even though it's a small minority of total repos. So the repository holds key value data in a Merkle search tree, MST. The tree's nodes hold keys with links to records and links to child nodes. All links are content addressed hashes of their target. So records are encoded to hashable bytes with deterministic Dazzle-CBOR, and the MST nodes themselves have their own Dazzle-CBOR encoding, which again is what you hash over to get the link to that content. So everything is bytes identified and linked by a hash over those bytes. And the archive format, which is a car file, is a flat series of pairs. So the hash of some object bytes followed by those bytes, hash of the next object bytes followed by those host bytes, plus some per block framing. If you read these pairs into a big map in memory where you key those hash links to the object bytes as the values, then walking over the tree to traverse the repo is just a hash map lookup to follow each link. This is what you have to do if the blocks in the archive are in some random unordered order. So pre-ordered traversal block ordering is just putting the serialized blocks in the archive into order for a depth first walk over the tree. So a depth first walk over the tree visits entries in key order, and this is usually how repositories on the network are processed. So if you're stream processing this archive, which in this case is pre-ordered at the bottom example, you find each block just in time as you read through the archive. The next link block that you want is the next block that appears in the archive. So you don't need the in-memory map. You get to release from memory each record block after you process it, and every MST node after it and all its children have been traversed. So this is great. The problem is that records are linked by the hash of the contents. So if two records have identical contents, then they have the same hash link from their different keys. They are the same record as far as content addressing is concerned. So this is fine and legal and good. There's no uniqueness constraint on record values within a repository. It would be weird if there was one. With stream ordering, that means you have to serialize that same record multiple times into the archive. So once for each time it appears under a key. So what if you're a stream processing parser? You see record 1 under key 1, and you process and discard it, and then you reach where key 2's record block should be, and it has the same link. What if that record content doesn't appear again in the archive for that second key? An archive that doesn't include the record a second time is still valid. It's just not stream ordered. So how can you be a streaming parser that's tolerant of this block ordering? You have to keep record 1 around the first time you see it, so that if it's referenced again, you can look it up. And in fact, you don't know in advance if you're going to need any record multiple times. So you actually have to keep every previous record around in memory, keyed by its hash link, the whole memory buffering thing that we were trying to avoid with hash ordering. So the whole point of stream ordering is defeated under the current spec. This isn't theoretical. So today, 0.4%, again, this is about a 1% sample of the network, of all repositories have records that are referenced from multiple keys. Most of these are not sort of like essential to the data they're trying to represent. They're more like accidents of how records are created, but it would be invalid to want to do that anyway, and it's kind of a problem in the spec regardless. So the fix for all this is really simple. We just need a way for a repository archive to signal to a parser that it's stream ordered or not. It cannot be implicit. The missing block in the earlier example would have been an invalid serialization of the repository if the archive was claiming to be stream ordered, and then you'd be able to reject it as a parser. And if the archive hadn't claimed to be stream ordered, then you would be buffering all the blocks anyway, and you wouldn't have a problem. So I hope we can agree that this is a problem, or maybe clarify to get some alignment on that. And these are, and then the challenge is, how do we signal this like stream ordered or not problem? And these are my initial ideas. Basically, number one is we could just say all repositories must be serialized in stream ordered or like pre-ordered block traversal, just not accept arbitrary block orderings. Then we would have no problem. The next three are sort of like ways that early on in the archive, we could put some sort of flag. So there's a roots array in the header that we could use the second slot for that's currently unused as a sort of signal. We could put something in the commit object. It's a bit weird because it's not really part of the commit, but it would work. And the commit object has to come first in a stream ordered repo. We could use the first block of the archive as a sort of magic signal that this is stream ordered or not, or something gross and implicit like the commit object appearing first means it is stream ordered. We could do it over transport, like a media type parameter, which then is lost when it's at rest. But for the purpose of like backfill in most use cases, I think it would effectively solve this problem. So that's all I have for slides. Brian, you've got your hand up.
Brian from Blue Sky. I might have missed one or two things, so I'm sorry, I had to run out really briefly. I do agree with the duplicate record, and I could be misremembering, but I kind of thought that could be the crux of all this, but I thought that we'd required that if there's duplicate records, you have to include the
So
I guess it's
required.
Yeah.
It's required if you're producing a stream ordered car, but it's not required if you're not producing a stream ordered car, I don't think, unless I misread that part. If it is, I think that would be onerous, but I guess maybe that would work.
We have, I think my colleague has implemented in Go an implementation in the way we did it is we optimistically assume the car is in ordered format. And so you get it, you can start reading it off the wire and go. And if you don't, but you always have to expect the next block. And so when you read off the car, the API is like peak kind of. And if you got what you expected, you parse it and then you drop it when you're done. And if you don't get it, the reader caches in memory until you get the block you expected. And what we found, so that's basically like doing this optimistically. And we found that like dramatically reduces memory consumption. It doesn't guarantee that your memory consumption is low.
So the problem with that is that these 0.4% of repositories could be serialized in a way that your parser would break on them unless you require that the block is duplicated, even if it's unordered. If you're optimistically discarding records because so far everything has been appearing in order, then when you encounter one later that references a record you previously discarded, then your parser blows up.
Okay, I'll have to dig back into it, sorry.
And yeah, like I know Mary implemented stream parsing in @Qt's parser, but buffers all blocks for this reason as well. And in my implementation in repo stream, I just dropped stream parsing for now until this is resolved.
Okay, thank you.
Hello.
Yeah, you have.
Oh, yeah. Okay, that's better. So I'm presenting some slides my colleague at the IPFS Foundation, Volker Mischa, made. It's all his research. The links from the slides go to the repo and the blog post. So if you want to double check the work or dig into the details, I recommend just downloading the PDF and clicking the links. So there's been some references already in the previous presentations to the load-bearing JSON CBOR mapping. It's an appendix now. I'm not really too invested in which of these things become internet drafts of the working group or which become work items, but I do think the tile map that had CBOR and JSON grayed out is a little optimistic. It's a profile of JSON and it's a profile of CBOR. So the profile of CBOR the AT Proto inherited from the IPFS Foundation prior art has a way to do floats, IEEE only floats. And the argument here is that the whole system, the JSON profile, should also have floats. Currently JSON arbitrary JSON can't be embedded in AT records because the JSON profile doesn't allow it, and a huge percentage of the JSON out there in the world that already exists, that's already being pumped around in various open data, scientific data, GeoJSON, has floats in it. JSON with floats. So yeah, the presentation here, I'll try to go through it quickly to leave more time for Q&A. So the way people are using floats in net new data, in data, AT proto-native data, people are encoding floats as strings when they need floats. You can do that. Your application logic can mark something as a string that's actually a float, and you can turn it into a float when you get it because you are expecting that because of the sort of lexicon, the schema, the JSON schema stuff. So Eli, who presented a little bit before, in his survey of what relays are actually doing in the wild, found a non-zero percentage of CBOR containing floats being relayed around in the wild. We're not sure exactly how it got there. Some people are forking the PDS and or forking the relay, disabling validation. Some people are putting floats in, a roundabout way because maybe it isn't net new data, perhaps. I don't know. So for whatever reason, people have been doing this sort of in user space. And the argument here is that it's safer and maybe in some cases cheaper to just let floats exist at the JSON level, since they're already allowed by the CBOR profile. They're already used in IPFS prior art. And when digging into the details of this, Volker found that most JSON parsers and native data formats in all the major languages, the 19 languages he surveyed, are already translating JSON numbers that look like floats into floats of the native data types of the language in which you're parsing JSON into. So just inheriting that convention, which seems near universal, could get us there an easier way, and it could just be native everywhere instead of having to do it in user land. Yeah, that's what I meant by user space. So for people that haven't dug into our kooky little CBOR profile, integers are minimally encoded, smallest CBOR type that it'll fit into. We use floats the opposite way. We maximally encode floats, always 64-byte, 64-bit IEEE doubles. If you really want to get into the details, -0.0 needs to be removed. The requirement here, I think, if you just zoom out a little, any JSON has to translate to exactly one CBOR, so that's the CBOR you sign, so that JSON will always verify after converting to CBOR. And yeah, there has to be one CBOR representation for any possible JSON. JSON has a little ambiguity. There's multiple semantically equivalent ways to express a float or an int as a JSON number. So we're arguing to just inherit this convention that parsers do in every major language, which is that if a JSON number has a decimal point in it, or an E, like 1E5, that's probably a float. And just convert to at proto specific CBOR that way, instead of always doing it off protocol, user space, or at the wrong layer. Yeah, it is kind of this simple. It is kind of like if you see a period or an E, it is a float. Even though JSON number has one type, most parsers sniff for the subtype, for the implicit type. And yeah, the only tricky bit is if it's a float in CBOR, when you kick it back to JSON, just put a 0.0 at the end. Lots of parsers already do this. This is sort of commonsensical. That's what CBOR Working Group, I hope, would recommend. So yeah, if you click these links, you can see the nitty-gritty details and test vectors of all the major parsers. Yeah. And yeah, there's a bit of a, there's always some wiggly bits on how different what JSON you get back coming back from CBOR, but that's sort of an inherent limitation. And you can always round trip and show that to the user to canonicalize. Like in user space, you can round trip to get one JSON representation of the multiple JSON ways of representing a given integer or float. But yeah. And as mentioned, the content identifiers that construct a car file already have to add a custom parsing step in any language. So in the extreme case, in the like 1 or 2 languages Volker found where major parsers don't automatically do this, you could sniff at that same stage where you're looking for byte strings and figuring out if they're CIDs or not. Yeah, I think I should leave 7 minutes. And thanks to the chairs and the group.
Thank you.
To discuss.
Brian, you got.
Brian Newbold from Blue Sky. So thanks both for you for presenting and for Volker and other folks that have like raised this on the mailing list and done all this research. Volker in particular has done like a whole bunch on this, and I think it's great. I'm also super excited for having these other use cases like scientific data sets and streaming or like sensor data or these other things in which floats would be pretty natural. I still have pretty strong concerns about all this. I'm a little concerned. I mean, one is just like the JSON data model is just numbers and they're not. Like it's not the JSON spec that you don't put a dot if it's an integer. It's just undefined. Like JSON doesn't say anything about that. And this relying on like, well, we did a bunch of testing and it turns out most of the time it mostly works. I'm uncomfortable about that. And I can kind of sharpen the goal of this like mapping back and forth. I think in some cases you can think about like the CBOR representation that goes in the repository is kind of the canonical one. And as long as that's clean, everything else doesn't matter. Some of the cases in which it's important to be able to round trip many times and continue to get the same output that we end up with in the ecosystem that might not apply in all use cases, but they do in some is, so, almost everything in AppProto starts as JSON that gets posted to the PDS. So there's that JSON to PDF, JSON to CBOR that happens in the PDS, goes out on the fire hose, usually it gets parsed back out into JSON. There's another time, like a time that it goes back is if the record was versioned and you want to check if it was the versioned. And this hasn't happened a ton in the network so far because not a lot of applications are supporting version, but there's some of these like profiles often can be updated in place. Anyways, you can end up with many versions of the same record and you want to know which version you have. And basically the way to do that is to turn it back into CBOR using a full AppProto SDK. You put it back into CBOR, you hash it, and you get a SID and you check. And some of the contexts in which you want to do that are like a moderation label. And you want to see like, does this label apply to this? Or you want to say, ooh, does this reply match back to this record post or this comment on a blog post or something like that? In those cases, this version checking is important. So anyways, that's just to motivate. I can feel a little like, are we being pedantic about this? Does it matter that we can go back and forth? I do think it matters.
No.
That we can do it.
It definitely matters. The CBOR, the JSON you get back from the CBOR.
Yeah.
You can turn back into CBOR. You can keep going back and forth. It'll be the same. It might not be the one you started with. Like if you put in +10, plus 10 and 10 are both valid JSON.
It's just
they go to CBOR 10, they come back 10 without the plus. They'll always be 10 without the plus.
I think the confidence in that rests on everyone does everything correctly. Every JSON implementation is doing this behavior, which isn't specified behavior. It's just most people do it, maybe. And you end up with developers who are like, oh, my thing didn't work. I use the standard library in my obscure esoteric language and it's not doing this thing. Whose fault is that? Do we go to the JSON implementation and be like, you're doing it wrong? It's not, they're just implementing the spec. I would also say this point at the end about the CBOR and bytes parsing, that would apply also if we did some kind of syntactual wrapper around floats. it's a equal point that like you already need to do this for bytes if you're taking the arbitrary app proto data as JSON and trying to parse it back out. You need to do this userland thing, this custom parsing out, and so we could be doing the same thing for floats as well. Sorry, that was like multiple comments.
Hey, Daniel Holmgren from Blue Sky. I get like quite nervous about requiring people to have custom JSON parsers. Just like that, it's just like a pretty, I don't know, a lot of people are just going to grab the off-the-shelf one. But everybody's already required to have a custom CBOR encoder. So I'm like, can we put more smarts in the CBOR encoding and less in the JSON parsing? And I'm wondering if, like, you know, like you do these tricks of, okay, every float has to be like 64-bit float and every int is the smallest integer. Could you do something like if it's a whole number, if it's an integer, then it must be encoded as an integer. And if there's a decimal point, then it has to be encoded as a float. And that doesn't preserve like the fact that it's like necessarily always a float, like, but for any given number, it does preserve it round trip. But so it's like you wouldn't describe the field as being a float. You would describe it as a number. And that means that in the data model, it could either be an integer or a float. Does that make sense? I don't know if I'm being clear about that.
Sorry, I don't understand the question.
I don't know. Maybe this is better for the mailing list to write it all up. But I basically want to not have any smarts in the JSON parser and not have to have any smarts in the programming language. And if we can put all of this into the CBOR encoder, then I'm a lot more comfy and happy with it. That's my.
I mean, I think that's the proposal. I think the proposal is that the CBOR decoder, or rather yeah, I see what you mean. So right now, at the status quo is that if the JSON has a float in it, it just barfs, it rejects it.
Mm-hmm.
It could just make it a CBOR float. And the CBOR float will, what? Where did base 64 come from? I don't know. I don't understand that question either. Oh, no, please no. Yeah, I'm not sure this requires JSON parsers to be smarter or less standard. What I'm saying is that the JSON parsers already do this in almost every language, or can. It's a pretty trivial thing to do in user space in the one language we found where you would need to. And you know, if you click the GitHub link, it's a lot clearer what I mean. Like every language has this distinction, and most parsers automatically, without even special configuration, just accept floats in the JSON, right? Like the only thing that doesn't accept floats in the JSON is the lexicon tooling. It's like above and below, it's fine. This is what I'm getting at.
Okay, sweet. Thank you.
Okay, cheers. So thank you. Thank you. Oh. And that is finished our session. And thank you all. Thank you. Cheers. A lot of fun this time. A lot of laughs. Yes.